We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. It's as simple as that.
We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a business, Mr. Beale.
Go on without me. Just go.
A good soldier never leaves a man behind.
Because I wouldn't give you 2 cents for all your fancy rules if behind them they didn't have a little bit of plain, ordinary, everyday kindness.
Life finds a way.
Welcome to Silver Screen Biases, where we dig into a critically acclaimed movie and evaluate the truth claims within it. I'm Nelson.
This is Jeff.
And this week we're joined by Stephen Kent, author of How the Force Can Fix the World. Stephen, I've heard you on a few different podcasts, the Christians for Liberty Network, as well as Glenn Beck on The Blaze. I'm sure you've done appearances a lot of other places as well. And you're gracing us with your presence this evening. You probably are the foremost authority that I know of on worldview in Star Wars and what Star Wars claims to be true about the world and how, as you say in your book, how it can fix the world. Before we get into production notes and biases within the movie, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so really happy to be here and dive in deep on Empire Strikes Back with y'all tonight. It is no small thing to come onto a show where we actually get into the weeds on stuff, because normally when you're doing like media interviews for a book or Star Wars or anything, you got like 5 minutes. So this is great. This will be a lot of fun. I am a political person. I started out of college as a door knocker, an activist, an organizer. And that grew into a political career in DC doing communications and writing. I started a political Star Wars podcast called Beltway Banthas in 2016 to start interviewing political figures, politicians, media personalities who I knew to be Star Wars fans. And it actually ended up creating so many bipartisan relationships between me and people in DC that it ended up being what I thought would be a pretty good hook for a book. The idea to go and interview the likes of Van Jones and Glenn Beck and Congressman Derek Kilmer. I almost got Ted Cruz and Cory Booker on the show. It was very, very close to making that happen. But all of this sort of shared love for Star Wars on Team Red and Team Blue, I was like, all right, everybody says they love this thing and they say they embrace its moral claims. But when they go out into the real world and live out their politics, they leave all of those claims of Star Wars at the door. Figure. People do that with their faith and the likes all the time. But that's what sort of set me on this journey of trying to take Star Wars more seriously than I ever had, as sort of a lifestyle statement, a belief about the way the world and the universe works. And I've been doing it ever since. So just 2016 to now, just talking about the politics of Star Wars. And I tricked someone into giving me a book deal for it and got to write How the Force Can Fix the World.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I listened to it. You did your own reading for it, correct? For the audiobook? Yes,
I did.
I also door knock for politics, and so I was listening to that while I was out walking.
That's great. I started in Raleigh. I was working for this organization called Americans for Prosperity. I know. I see the T-shirt for everybody who's listening to the podcast version. That's kind of where my journey started, and doing ballot initiatives and protecting the sharing economy and all that kind of stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I've only been with them a short time now, but I've loved it so far. So.
That's great.
Well, but before we dive too deep into the movie here, let's get to know our guest here just a little bit more. Stephen, I've got 3 questions here for you. The first one here, and these are just questions, just to kind of give us an idea of where you stand on some things, so we can maybe pick your brain on some of these topics later on in the episode. Is where do you stand politically? What's your political bias?
I am a conservative by birth and a libertarian by choice. So for me, that basically means that I have a more reactionary conservative nature that I happen to believe is at odds with what is best for society, myself, and the world. And so I am a libertarian by practice, but I find it very hard.
Why is that? Can you give us some examples on why specifically libertarian? Was it hard for you?
You know, I think this is what I really poured into How the Force Can Fix the World, in truth, which is that libertarianism requires a belief in letting go and abdicating the desire for control, fighting for the ring of power, and really, I think, being the faction that embraces throwing it back into the fires from which it came. And I believe
That's the wrong
in that
movie series.
Yeah, I know. I believe in that very much. And I happen to believe that it is correct and right, but it is also not my nature. It's what I read, and I liked what I read, and so I try to adhere to it as best I can.
Right on. That was a great explanation of that. I love that. All right. And what's your religious bias? Where do you stand religiously or within a faith construct?
I am a Protestant Christian. I was raised Presbyterian and now practicing non-denominational. I am definitely what I would refer to as like a searcher. You know, I've moved through different aspects of Christianity from the period in college where I consider myself more spiritual and less religious, and I don't go to church. I just, pretend to read the Bible. So I've gone through all sorts of different iterations of that, but I believe very strongly in the one God.
Would you say that, because with non-denominational, that can come in a lot of flavors, would you say that you lean more towards a modern progressive Christianity or a more conservative, traditional Protestant Christianity?
Probably the latter there. And, I'm personally at a moment in my life where I've always had a pretty tortured relationship to, I don't know, I guess I don't know what the word is, like mega churches and then like rock, non-denominational churches with, loud music and smoke and lights and all this stuff. I'm so tired from it. And I really hunger right now for quiet and the hymnal of my childhood Presbyterian church. Yeah. And I recently found myself attending a Eastern Orthodox service just by happenstance and singing from the hymn book in a quiet and reverent way. It was like it spoke to me in a way. Like I was like, I feel like this is where I actually belong or what I need right now. So I don't know.
There's something beautiful about liturgy that I think goes unappreciated in a lot of Protestant circles.
I 100% agree. I've always had a lot of admiration for practicing Muslims because, what they do, with the prayer rituals and the bowing and the recitations, I go, these are people who take things seriously. And I like serious people. And so I've kind of found myself caught up in this Gen Z rush towards Catholicism. Not that I've actually taken that step, but I've felt myself going, I think I understand why I can count friends on two hands that have joined the Catholic Church because people are hungering for seriousness right now.
That's interesting. So where we live is the Catholic community is pretty small. It's mostly Protestant. In fact, mostly like Mennonite and Amish, or like one generation removed from it. So I've not seen that much myself, but it's really interesting that you comment on Gen Z looking for seriousness. There's also with them, they're painting broad brushstrokes, a generation, right? Their sense of humor has also leaned into absurdism at the same time. They both want. They both mock comedy and want seriousness at the same time. It is quite interesting. And then one last question for you, right, Jeff?
Yes. All right. So we obviously just getting to know you here. We know that Star Wars is your thing, but going beyond Star Wars, what would you say is your other favorite movies or genres or series of movies or something? Like, what other cinematic things do you enjoy?
I am a shameless Titanic superfan.
Okay.
Wow. I go to re-releases of that movie. I collect Titanic things. And that is probably the movie that I have rewatched the most times,
Wow.
next to Star Wars. And I know basically, so I'm here to talk about Star Wars, and my next favorite movie is Titanic. So I am not a artistic person, I think, as I love that movie a lot, and it's shaped, I think, the way that I think about the world in just as profound of ways as Star Wars has.
I admire that. Now, I will say, like, Titanic was, for me, has always been a movie like I've had a love-hate relationship with, because, like, visually amazing. Musically, James Horner did a great job on that soundtrack. It was the love story that ruined it for me, that makes the movie hard to watch. Like, just like, and I get it's a fictional story on a non-fictional historical moment, but like, I want so badly to enjoy every aspect of that movie because of the cinematic aspect of it. But like, and I love Leonardo DiCaprio. Like, it's not even that it's bad acting. It's just like, I just have a hard time.
You didn't buy the chemistry.
I didn't. I had a hard time, and I want to. Like, I would love
totally
to
okay.
do it, but like, but it's a beautifully done movie. Like, I'm not an Avatar fan. I think this is I'm blanking on his name real quick. James Cameron's best. I think this is way better than the Avatar series, but
no question.
I have a hard time investing in that movie. But I admire. I don't come into too many people that talk about this movie currently. You know, this is exciting.
Of note, Titanic debuted 5th on the IMDb Top 250 when it first came out. Topped at 4th, but dropped off by January of 1999. So it was on the IMDb Top 250 for just about a year.
It's so surprising that it's not on there. Like, it is a very iconic movie.
Yeah.
Incredibly iconic. And, you know, it's one of those movies, along with Star Wars, that you just don't really come across that many people who don't know exactly what you're talking about. When you reference it, say that you've seen it. Yeah. You know, when you come across someone at the office who's like, I've never seen a Star Wars movie, those people are unicorns. Yeah. They're unicorns. And Titanic, that movie just gets me. And you mentioned the music, the rhythm, the tension as we build towards the inevitable sinking. Yep. I just
spoilers.
I can't get enough. I can't get enough of it.
Yeah.
And for me, I just the why for me is that when I was 11 years old and I was watching that movie, and watching things come apart, and watch the frailty of this thing that we call, you know, being civilized. Yeah. I loved it, and I wanted to watch it again. And I just watched this movie to get to the sinking and get to the part where the first shot is fired into an innocent passenger, and Cal says to his bodyguard, you know, it's falling apart. You know, we got to move fast if we're going to get on a boat. And that idea of the falling apart is probably a huge part of why I'm a libertarian. I kind of believe that the trappings of society are all temporary and based on convenience. And you know, when things do eventually fall apart, the people who are prepared are going to be the ones who come out on the other side. And I started thinking about that after Titanic, and I just never stopped.
That's incredible.
And so it's kind of the origin story of my paranoia.
I love that. Maybe I need to give that movie another watch.
I don't think I've seen it since the first time I saw it, and I was like 10.
The Joker, it just makes me think of like the Joker when he says to Batman in the interrogation room, you know, these civilized people will eat each other. And it's like Batman had to sort of prove that the Joker didn't believe in people as much as he should, but the Joker's still right.
Wow, that's awesome.
So Titanic.
Let's dive into some production history.
Let's do it. So this episode is Star Wars Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back. It was released in 1980. Its approximate runtime is 2 hours and 4 minutes. The director is Irvin Kershner. So we've moved out of George Lucas directing the first one, and now Irvin is directing the second one. It's rated PG. just the rating stats. It's currently 8.7 out of 10 on the IMDb. It's number 15 as of us recording this episode on the IMDb Top 250. On Rotten Tomatoes, it's 94% tomato meter and 97% audience. So pretty strong on both sides.
Audience
there.
and critic consensus.
Yeah. The budget for this movie, two different sources, but the one that kept coming up was about $18 million for the production of this movie.
That's right.
In 1979-ish, whenever they were filming. So
Right.
what does that translate to about today?
So $18 million in $1979 with inflation due to money printing brings us to $66 million in 2023 dollars.
Still not that much.
A relatively
movies.
inexpensive movie. I actually looked up what The Force Awakens cost, and it was hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, this movie was a critical success, but if we look at the dollars it brought in, it still doesn't compare much to, like, Force Awakens brought in billions, and this one brought in hundreds of millions.
Now, I'd be curious to see, because, like, they just, like, as we're recording this, so this will come out a little bit later, but, like, they just released the 40th anniversary of, was it? Yeah, The Empire Strikes Back. It was just in theaters not too long ago.
Mm-hmm.
And, or was it the third one? Oh, now I'm messing up my stats. One of them was just in the theaters.
Return of the Jedi is in theaters this week.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Yep.
Okay, which was 83. Okay, so I'd be curious if they were like what the current, like what the all-time sales is of Empire Strikes Back is.
Yeah.
Just to see like if it will catch up, and especially if they do a release like this one, like Empire.
Yeah, they love
Return of the Jedi.
their re-release and special editions.
And I do appreciate that because like these three movies, the original trilogy are ones that I'm only 33 years old. Like these are ones I did not see in theaters.
Of course.
But like these would be cool to experience, except for the updated CGI that's just terrible.
I know
like,
that
these would be cool to see in big screen again.
The appreciation for like large screen cinema experience is dwindling. I always prefer it. Movies
absolutely.
are always better on a big screen.
I agree.
But with the booming noise, gotta wear your earplugs because it's too loud and I'm an old man.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's dive into the movie, Nelson.
Yeah.
What do you have any starting points for us or things you'd like to?
First off, as our listeners who listened to the last episode know, I did not enjoy A New Hope. I think it's a bad movie. This one, dramatically different. I think this is an excellent movie. A lot of fun to watch. The direction's a lot better. The acting's a lot better. The writing's a lot better. Where A New Hope really shines is in its practical effects and in the scope of vision of this world. And I don't think any of that's lacking in Empire Strikes Back. I think it continues strongly there. And then all the things that A New Hope was weak on, I think Empire really improves on. So I really enjoyed watching this movie. I don't think it's got a whole lot of weight as far as like biases and claims about what's true about the world and what's right. But I'm sure, Steven, you've got some opinions on this.
That's why we have the expert on for this.
but despite that, it was a really it's an enjoyable movie, I really enjoyed it. So that's just the broad brushstroke there. A couple things I noticed. I think Yoda has the most prescient lines, which is appropriate for his kind of hermit, wizened character. One of the ones he says is Luke says he's looking for a great warrior. And Yoda's response is, "Great warrior, war does not make one great." And I just think that that's a really big claim that kind of gets buried. The dialogue kind of gets whisked away there. So we know that a big inspiration for the Star Wars franchise for Lucas was the Vietnam War. And this was kind of a rejection of imperialism. And so that line makes sense in that context of he's kind of denouncing war doesn't make somebody great. However, if we look through history, a lot of the people who have the great attached to their name were expert warriors and leaders. Now, I kind of lean similar to Stephen, where with radical libertarianism, leaning towards anarchism. So I don't think that these people were great. But the line just caught me as particularly interesting.
Yeah, no, I definitely leave it to Yoda to, give all the thought provoking lines and stuff. But no, that's interesting because like I don't know. I guess I don't know how I thought about that line because like I've seen war. I'm 33 years old, so I've seen the War on Terror. I've seen, I think Desert Storm was at the end of '80s. At the end of the '80s, I could be wrong about that. I don't know I don't remember any of that. But
early '90s.
Yeah, just like there. I know I've experienced war as a living and breathing human. So like,
and the glorification of war.
Oh, absolutely. Like it just like, but I think I would lean towards the side of agreeing with Yoda, where it's like, I mean, war can definitely make figures stand out, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are
great.
Yeah. Like it'll definitely set people apart, but whether or not they're great, I think is defined way beyond.
Yeah. And there's always the starry-eyed believers like Luke and, the people who say thank you for your service and call people a war hero. And then there's, of course, the pretty prototypical veteran who goes, I'm not a hero. You don't know what I did.
Right.
That's kind of a classic story, I think, for America's mostly illegal wars that it has fought since World War II. The last time that we had sort of a great good versus evil conflict that really, I think, ignited people's sense of purpose about why we were fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Yoda is someone who went through the Clone Wars and the realization at the end that they were fighting themselves the entire time. That the war that they were fighting was all orchestrated for their own demise. So I always think about sort of his backstory and perception of the war as being like really similar to, I think, about how a lot of young veterans of America's most recent conflicts feel. Like, this whole war on terror thing, this was just us chasing shadows around the world. And I've not been made great by doing it.
Right.
Sort of moving in a different direction, but like speaking specifically about Yoda, and I'll allow any other Star Wars canon to infiltrate this, so we can reach outside the reaches of Empire Strikes Back. But like Yoda specifically, if Yoda was an American, where would he fall politically? Like with what we know about how he handled the Clone Wars, and then seeing in Empire Strikes Back where he ended up, and we know, I mean, this movie's been out forever. We know that he dies then in Return of the Jedi. Like between the three original trilogy, we don't get much Yoda. In the original trilogy. It's like if Yoda was an American in 2023, where would he fall politically? And I guess and would he be a different leader than he was in the Star Wars time? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's definitely two chapters of Yoda. There's prequel Yoda during the war and, him trying to hold on to the Jedi Order and push them through, a military conflict. And then there's Yoda of the original trilogy and Empire Strikes Back, which we know. And he strikes me as a liberal Quaker, a Quaker living in a Pennsylvania commune, pacifist, quiet, stoic in sort of reception of emotion, recognition of emotion, and does not believe in fighting anymore after seeing what kind of hell it wrought on the galaxy. So I think Yoda of old is a liberal Quaker.
Yeah. So I think because it's kind of hard to compare him to modern situations. I think if we were to compare him to other works of fiction, he's very much kind of like a Lieutenant Dan character, but not quite as jaded. He was somebody that believed in his what he was doing, and then now is very, what's the word I'm looking for? Disenchanted with what he'd done up until that point.
That was Lieutenant Dan of Star Wars was definitely Obi-Wan in that most recent series on Disney Plus.
That's true.
Jaded Obi-Wan being a meat cutlery guy in Tatooine and just quietly living through his life, jaded and lost.
Yeah,
but he found the way back.
Yeah. One character, and it wouldn't be really modern history that Yoda's kind of similar to, that like a real life person. And I had to do the search a couple times because I kept getting it wrong. Smedley Butler, who was a highly decorated United States Marine Corps Major General. He was close friends with George H.W. Bush's father, and was a major political figure at the time, very decorated war hero. They kind of were positioning him to take on a lot of political power as well. And then he became disillusioned with that, and he famously gave a speech titled "War is a Racket." And I think that kind of really captures as well. Like, if you want to look into real life people that real figures of history, I think Yoda kind of matches that as well.
Mm-hmm. To kind of end my dovetail with this specific topic, in the Last Jedi, where we see Yoda for the last time within the 3 trilogies.
Yeah.
He says a quote: "The greatest teacher failure is, Luke. We are what they grow beyond. That is the true burden of all masters." From an entertainment standpoint, I appreciate the consistency of Yoda, or like the realistic growth that you see from Clone Wars to, like you said, just the trainee type mentality in The Empire Strikes Back. And then to see him as more of this spiritual leader, or like this, not guru, but this just more of like wise elder. It's a realistic progression. And I think that quote is acknowledging just like, not just the failures of other people, but he's acknowledging like the Jedi were not perfect in this story arc of, 9+ movies. Like, and Yoda's aware of the mistakes that were made politically or non-politically that led to this issue. Like, the Jedi could have handled the Sith Lord differently in ways that could have led to different outcomes. So I just appreciate that realistic growth of Yoda specifically as a political leader.
Yeah, and Yoda, in one of the animated series titled Star Wars Rebels, he talks a little bit about this to one of the characters named Ezra, who communes with him through the Force. And Yoda at this time is on Dagobah, so it's sort of around the time of A New Hope, and Yoda's in exile. And he's talking to Yoda about his own problems with fear and self-doubt. And Yoda does mention the fall of the Jedi Order and the rise of the Empire, and he blames himself, and he probably should, because he could not see who the Dark Lord of the Sith was right under his nose. And he says why, and he says, "I was afraid, I was blinded by fear, and my fear spread throughout the entire Jedi Order." And you kind of like look back on Yoda's stewardship of the Jedi during the war, and it's just kind of stunning that he ever bought into this idea that Jedi should be soldiers for the Republic. But they had convinced themselves that there was a threat large enough in the galaxy that necessitated the Jedi betraying everything that they say they are about, which is being peacekeepers and diplomats. And, never using the Force for attack, only for defense, what he says in The Empire Strikes Back. But he was afraid. And we do know that fear, as Yoda says in episode 1, is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger, leads to hate, leads to suffering. It's the cycle that we see all Star Wars characters sort of wash themselves through.
Yeah.
And only the ones that can get out of the cycle are the ones who make it on the light side in the end.
Yeah. A much longer quote from Yoda, not too long after that in the movie. This is a direct quote, so it's going to have all of his specific uses of grammar involved. Yoda says to Luke, "Ready are you? What know you of ready? For 800 years have I trained Jedi. My own counsel will I keep on who is to be trained. A Jedi must have the deepest commitment, the most serious mind. This one a long time have I watched. All his life has he looked away." And he's talking about Luke there. He's talking to Obi-Wan. "To the future, to the horizon. Never his mind on where he was. What was he doing? Adventure, excitement. A Jedi craves not these things. You are reckless," he's saying to Luke there.
Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting analysis of what maturity is. As I've heard said before, idealism is a young man's game, right? This idea of pursuing adventure, pursuing the exotic, the exciting, it loses its veneer as you mature, and you realize that's not where true joy is going to be found. That's not where true happiness is going to be found.
If I can rebuttal that real quick, I saw that specific idea of recklessness and youth adventure and stuff. Like I'm going through a men's Bible study with a couple other guys, and we're going through a John Eldridge book that talks about the stages of manhood.
Wild at Heart?
Well, it's not Wild at Heart. It's one
of his other ones?
Yeah, it's essentially like the Wild at Heart sequel. Or like,
okay.
I mean, almost all of his writings intertwine.
Yeah.
But he goes through the stage, like, in the one he talks about, like, the, we've had to miss the last couple of weeks because of some life situations. I don't have these, I wasn't prepared to talk about this. So I don't have the specific names right off the top of my head. But he talks about how, like, this adventure as us young men, I mean, this is in the book, it's specifically talking to biological men. It's a change of where our priority is. So not that it's being reckless when we're younger to choose adventure. It's just that our priorities are different when we're at a younger age. So like
we have less responsibilities at a younger age too. Yeah.
Well, we have less responsibilities, but like we have different responsibilities.
Yeah.
Being less reckless isn't necessarily that it's more mature. It's just that we've shifted our ability to be able to be reckless. So going through this Bible study, like specifically, and just because like there's many stories in the Bible about some younger characters that are doing these things that are a lot more crazy and chaotic versus some of these old wiser sage characters, and they both have their merits. So like I've kind of shifted my perspective on this idea of like, well, wait till you grow up, because like I'm currently doing youth ministry at my church, and well, actually, Nelson, you're right there with me.
Yep.
Like it helped me look at adolescence a lot differently, because like they've got different priorities. So like so their quote unquote recklessness isn't it can be immature or destructive, but it's meeting what is their priority of like I have something different to gain than what you think I have to gain in that perspective. So like I don't know, I've kind of had this like change of perspective of like of what reckless means in that idea, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, at that point in life, the thing that you need is experience. And experiences are part of what enables you to one day be wise. Right. And we go through centuries and centuries of this cycle. And, we basically just try to make sure that young people don't get themselves killed. Like that's the ultimate goal. It's like everything is fine as long as you're alive, to not make the same mistake tomorrow.
Yeah.
That is part of what you should be doing when you're younger. We kind of have this weird thing going on in our culture that social scientists are picking up on now, that kids are waiting until they're close to 20 now to get their driver's licenses. I guess it's great that they're not having premarital sex like they used to, but also it's kind of weird that they're not, and says a lot about what they are doing with their time, mostly staying away from people. Young reckless behavior is part of living, and that's how you develop wisdom. Bless our older, more wise folks who have basically learned to balance thinking about the future with concerns of the present, because young people are always very wrapped up in their feelings right now and what they feel urgently needs to be done. And older folks are really great, I think, about thinking about downstream consequences. That's how we protect our children, primarily, about thinking about downstream consequences. There's another Yoda line that's actually in episode 1. It's passed to Obi-Wan Kenobi through Qui-Gon Jinn. It's one of the first things that's said in the movie. Obi-Wan, he says he feels like a dark presence or a dark force. He has a bad feeling about something coming. And then Qui-Gon Jinn says to him, keep your mind here and now in the moment where it belongs. And Obi-Wan says, but Master Yoda said I should be mindful of the future. And, that's Master Yoda saying, do think about things that are coming.
Yeah.
But then Qui-Gon is reminding him, but not at the expense of right now.
Yeah.
You need to be focused on the mission right now or you're no good. So balance, as in all things.
Yeah. Jeff, what you were saying about how in their own eyes, they're not being reckless. They just have different priorities. It made me think of, this is a bit of a tome of a book, Ludwig von Mises's Human Action, where he basically makes the argument that like every action that people make is, if you look close enough, a rational action, right? People make choices. Even when they seem to be reacting, they are choosing to do the thing that in that moment they perceive as being the optimal choice for them. And so it can appear reckless, or if you can zoom out far enough, it might even be reckless. But that doesn't mean it's an irrational decision. there's a couple, famous lines from this movie that hit actually a little bit differently than kind of the cultural remembrance of them is, Like one of the big ones, of course, is right as Han Solo is being frozen in carbonite, Leia says to him, "I love you," and his response is, "I know." The original script was supposed to be "I love you" as well, and it wasn't working out, and so Harrison Ford says to the director, "Hey, I'm going to try something a little different. Let's just see if it works." He says, "I know." They decide, hey, that's the right action for this. Now, in kind of the way that the culture has absorbed that line, it's kind of more of Han Solo's hotshot, braggadocious behavior. But in the context of the movie, he has spent the entire movie trying to convince Leia that he's aware she loves him and that he loves her too, right? So I know in that sense, it's not kind of like this braggadocious machismo behavior. Right. It's just a beautiful acknowledgement that of the fact that So
Han and I have kind of similar tastes in women in that the kind of girls that I was always attracted to and eventually married were the kind that like kind of wanted to play like standoffish, in getting to know each other, like being mean to each other. And, like the girl who bullies you at school or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're like, I think she just likes you.
Yeah.
and I was kind of one of those young men who was like usually very attracted to the girl who kind of wanted to be mean to me. And Leia is that girl. She's the girl who kind of acts like she doesn't need you. She points out all of your flaws and imperfections and vulnerabilities. And Han is kind of one of those guys who goes, you like me. Yeah. And I think you're pretty. Yeah. And I think you're pretty. And like, I had that exact same relationship with my wife in high school, when we were just sort of friendly. She was rude and crude to me and, kind of pointed out all the ways in which I was a total dweeb, and she was like super cool. So I kind of like, I get it. And Han got it too. It wasn't braggadocious. This entire movie, he's flirting very aggressively with her to get her to stop being so standoffish and Mary Sue-ish. Like, be vulnerable. And that's what he's been trying to get her to admit the entire time. So when she says, I love you, when she finally says, I love you, and, acts like a well-adjusted emotional adult, then he just is like, victory. Yeah. I know. I've known this entire time. Yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah. And then the other, I think, most iconic line from this movie is Yoda saying, try not, do or do not, there is no try.
Yeah. Baseball coach dads all over the world use that line to berate and encourage their children. I've probably used it at least 3 times this week on my poor daughter, who's so tired of hearing it. But like Star Wars gives us a book of virtues and lines like this that get used in common parlance all the time.
Absolutely.
I recently just used, and I don't remember what, but I homeschool my daughter, and we were having a history class, and I said something about wars not make one great. But I don't remember why. But
this particular line, I had an incident with my son recently. He gets stage fright. He's a very silly boy who hates the idea that somebody might think he's silly, right? He loves to make people laugh by being absurd. But the moment that somebody's laughing at him, he gets very uncomfortable. And he had this situation recently where he had to, we also homeschool, and it was end of year homeschool co-op thing. And he had to sing part of the song, and the whole way to the event, he's crying because he doesn't want to do it. And I'm like, listen, buddy, this comes with it. You don't have to remember all the words, but you've got to do your absolute best to do it to the best of your ability. Do not give a half attempt on this. Like, you actually have to do it. And the whole do or do not, there is no try. I think for a lot of people, while that is an intended encouraging statement, it can also almost be discouraging, because it's like, well, what if I can't do it? Right?
Because to a lot of people, like, and I would probably put myself in this camp, not to say I disagree with Yoda, but like, for me, trying is a positive word. I'm a fairly new parent, like, so there's a lot of things like I'm trying for the first time. Like just like, but I see that in a positive light. It's almost like Yoda saying trying's not good enough. Because even when people that try things, they know failure is still a risk. So it's not negating failure when you just do it versus try it. Like there's still failure or risk involved.
People use the language of trying all the time. Kids are usually being very earnest, right? Like kids are usually very earnest in that, like, I am trying to do this. But also you can see where they're afraid. You can see where they're withholding and they're not going that extra step. And I think that's why it's valuable. We are rock climbers in our family since the beginning of the pandemic. That's been our family sport. We do it indoors, we do it outdoors. And, boy, can I tell you, as a climber myself and also guiding my daughter through some tougher level climbs, she's 12. When you are upside down and you've got a handhold a little bit in front of you that you've got to get to, there really is not trying to reach it. You're either going to get it or you're not. And if you tell yourself, I don't know, like, you have to go over this mental hump where you go, I'm going to reach for this thing and I'm going to grab it. And if I fall, I fall. And only when you do that, only when that's your mindset climbing, can you then make the grab on that really impossible hold. You just kind of have to embrace the idea that you will fail. And that you might get hurt and you might be totally fine. I think that's just sort of like the part about half-assing it. People do it with addiction all the time. I'm trying to quit smoking. No, you either quit or you don't. There's no trying to quit smoking. And I think a lot of people, I've used that in my addiction behaviors as well, as a way to cover up when I'm not really doing the thing that I need to do.
It's almost the opposite of what he just chastised Luke for, right? Where he says you're too reckless. And then when Luke shows reservation on an attempting of something, he's like, no, don't reserve yourself. Don't hold back. Go all in on it. So there's a bit of a entrepreneurial spirit he's calling him to there. Like, you need to fully commit and be open to the idea of failure to succeed. If you're not willing to fully commit and be willing to risk failure, you're not going to succeed and you will fail.
Yeah. It's all about belief. And it's not so much about belief in yourself as a belief that the Force is real. And for Luke, who is, he can feel the Force, he is powerful in it, but he is not in The Empire Strikes Back at the point yet of being like a Force guru. He's still consumed with self-doubt and fear and uncertainty about this thing that is called the Force. When he's on Dagobah, he is learning from Yoda, like, what it really is. Like, this is the first time he's ever heard that the Force, like, moves through all of us and, connects living things together. Obi-Wan Kenobi in A New Hope didn't tell him any of this. And I think us as Christians, we do this all the time. Do you believe that God is going to take care of you and your family and open up the right doors for you, or do you not?
Absolutely.
And for me, like, I'm going through some job insecurity right now. And I am trying to practice in real life right now the letting go aspect of it and going, I don't need to knock down every single door and get on my knees and, like, beg friends from previous lives for a job that I don't want. I'm going to pray and I'm going to wait. And I'm going to actually believe in what I preach and what I talk about and what I say I believe. And I can just tell you, like, from everyone that I know who does their own walks of faith, only when they actually exhibit belief do things really happen. Because most of us are like Luke in the Death Star trench in the first movie, using the targeting computer. You're going to shoot the rockets and blow up the Death Star, but you want to use the targeting computer because why wouldn't you aim?
Right.
Why wouldn't I knock down doors to find a job and apply everywhere? But then he hears a voice that says, let go, use the force. And that's when he shoots blind. He just shoots a random rocket. He has to believe that the force will do it. Yeah. And when he was talking about the rocks, do or do not, there is no try. That was about lifting rocks and moving objects. And Luke didn't believe yet. Like, he was still not a full believer.
Even though he'd experienced it.
Yeah. Even after he's moved small objects, there was still that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've experienced God before. I've experienced God so many times before.
Right.
And still today, I have times of doubt.
Absolutely.
And feelings of being alone.
It's a great analogy.
That's what this is.
Yeah.
That's what this life journey is all about. Constant forgetting and then remembering again.
Now, I want to ask you, as somebody that has been in the Protestant wing of Christianity your entire life, how well do you think the Force serves as an allegory for faith?
I think it serves well.
Okay. In my experience, it's a little bit more Eastern Buddhism, Taoism, and dualism. Do you think that using that as an allegory for faith could cause confusion or compromise people's issues, their beliefs?
No, I don't. Because you can have different conversations about like what the Force is and what it means. There's, of course, the light side and the dark side of the Force.
Yeah.
And that is the part that is really kind of wrapped up in, the Tao and Eastern philosophy about morality and sort of the foundations of Carl Jung's shadow self and the range of emotions that basically disconnect us from living and cooperating well with others. Fear, anger, hatred, like that's the dark side of the Force. Peace, serenity, calm, and focus. These are the light side of the Force. So I think that's the part of it that maybe is, of course, a disconnect.
Sure.
But the part that is not is, I think, what we just discussed, which is what the Force is. It is an unseen, untouched, unheard entity with a will that has a plan, and you can either get on board with it or you can fight against it. But the Force, they say it all the time, like the will of the Force, it has a plan for how things are going to go.
Right.
And the people who push against it are the people who usually end up on the dark side because they try to exert control over things that cannot be controlled. I absolutely think of that as like fundamental to the Christian experience. And that faith, that sort of having to believe that there is a purpose and grand design. Yeah, I think the Force is a very appropriate way to look at it. But I do understand sort of the moral subjectivity concerns about the light and the dark side.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we talked about this with the previous episode.
Yeah.
For me, like the one aspect that's missing in the parallel of the Force to Christianity, Christian faith, is that, Jesus spends a lot of his time with the gray. Like a lot of the people that Jesus interacts with is the gray, whereas Star Wars is there's good or bad. Like, well, specifically this trilogy. Like, obviously, bigger canon goes into gray Jedis and stuff, but like just this trilogy talks about just this yes or no. There is no middle. There is no try. It's yes or no. Like, and I think that's the one thing where in this specific thing, it misses an aspect of, just because like Jesus spent his whole mission with the people or with this idea of like the gray, like the what if, the in-between. And like, so like, I think that's the one thing that's missing. But for me, and I talked about this in the previous episode, like I do relate a lot of these little moments to my faith. Like, so for me, I lean more towards yes, I see these parallels, but I'm looking for them, and so I can make them fit in there. And I think they can fit through conversation and stuff.
I think the area that you spoke to that I agree with is basically in Empire Strikes Back, there's the instance of the cave on Dagobah, where Luke feels a dark presence coming from a cave on Dagobah, and he asks Yoda, "What's in there?" And Yoda says to him, "Only what you take with you." What does that mean? That means that when you go into that dark side cave, the dark side is going to project to you your worst fears, the things that you are truly most insecure about, and you're going to face them head to head. That's what happens in dark side caves, is you're basically in a battle with the shadow self and your inner darkness, or your inner sin, your brokenness.
Right.
And in the course of that confrontation with your shadow self, with your darkness, that is how Luke first begins to empathize with Darth Vader being a human being. And so I would disagree that the Force kind of theology in The Empire Strikes Back is all black and white, because Luke is in that moment. He fights a Darth Vader apparition, cuts the mask open, and sees his human face.
Okay.
The message is, of course, then that, look, you too could end up like this guy if you make the wrong choices here in your training. And then lo and behold, by the end of the movie, Luke learns that Darth Vader is his father, therefore a human being. And that puts Luke on the path to wanting to save his soul and redeem him.
Right.
So there's just sort of that seeing your brokenness in others that begins with the dark side cave on Dagobah. Yoda happens to have also faced his shadow self in kind of previous animated series and books. And that's what allowed him to truly master the Force, was the recognition that the dark side is not an entity that is like a boogeyman under the bed. It is inside of you. And you either feed it or you don't. And when Yoda realizes that the dark side is equally a part of him as the light is, which I kind of feel that way about my sin and my brokenness and, my disconnection from God. Only when I accept that can I then even be open to the possibility of being saved from it. I hope that's not convoluted or too many points at once.
No, I think that's a terrific point. You're saying, that Yoda had the revelation that it's inside you and you feed it. Something a pastor once said to me that's really stuck with me is that sin is like appetite. You feed an appetite and it grows. You starve an appetite and it shrinks. There's a lot of behavioral therapy that goes into conquering sin. If you embrace this and say, oh, this is just who I am, and you feed that appetite and urge within you, that you're edifying it and growing it, and rather than fighting it.
Yeah, that idea of starving an appetite by abstention from something is definitely very familiar to me, in that it's the Jedi's approach as far as romantic attachments, relationships, and feelings of romantic love. They kind of went the route of, if you were to be involved in romantic relationships, they cannot be intertwined from then fear and wanting to protect that person, clouding your judgment in all sorts of ways. And so they go the route of abstention.
Right.
And then there's the alternative theory that fans have always quibbled about, which is that actually it would be really good if the Jedi had healthy understandings of love that was not based in fear and coveting and control, but true selfless love in the way that I think it is truly meant to be in the context of a healthy God-based marriage. And I struggle with this a lot. I'll be honest about that whole idea about starving different appetites and whether or not it works. I've struggled my entire life since being exposed at age 12 to pornography with that problem and justifying it for years as like engaging with the Jungian shadow self, being like,
sure,
well, this is what I do to feed the shadow just a little bit so it doesn't get out of control.
Right.
And I went through long cycle with that. After I, was exposed to things at an age that I just wish it never happened.
Yeah. The average age of first exposure now is 9, by the way.
Yeah. Gets worse and worse. I've never talked about this with another human being, so I don't don't know why I'm blurting this out today.
We can cut it if you prefer.
No, it's okay. That battle and that idea of starving versus starving an appetite versus sort of trying to keep it under control by strategic feeds. A lot of people struggle with that, and I have found that I went through years of trying to strategically feed the wolf so that it didn't consume me. But it was really just justification for not wanting to stop. Do or do not. There is no try.
Right. No, absolutely. Where the appetite conversation comes up the most is, so, from a Christian worldview, homosexuality is sin. And so I find myself in conversations with people where they say, "Oh, you hate me because of who I am." And I say, no, I think that you choose to identify with your sin. And I think that sin is sin. Mm-hmm. If it was that you say, well, I'm an alcoholic and I was born an alcoholic and you just hate that I love alcohol, it's like, well, no, I just don't think that you should identify with your sin, When somebody feels compelled to murder, we don't say, well, that's just who they are, and we need to embrace that. And isn't it beautiful, the diversity of humanity that we have? We recognize that, no, this isn't healthy behavior. It's negative in a lot of ways. And just because you feel compelled to do it doesn't make it a good thing. And
I think we all would say that we carry different propensities for different sin and different shadow.
Absolutely.
I think everybody comes to the table with a different dark passenger. For some people, it might be a violent nature. For some people, it might be, hypersexual, drive or desire. For some others, you mentioned homosexuality. It might be your taste for alcohol. It might be a desire to experiment with drugs because it gives you a thrill or whatever. I've never had a problem.
Raw gluttony. I just love
the food,
to eat.
Right? Well, yeah, it's like, well, everybody has their thing, and I know what mine is, and it's been a lifelong battle to try to figure out like the right strategies and the godly approach to actually dealing with those things. Identifying with your sin, people take that sin, take that darkness, and they go, well, it's part of me. It is who I am.
Yeah,
but I would say that that's the lie. That's the worldly lie to tell you to identify with your sin. It's the identity thing.
Yeah.
I think the better approach, which feels right to me from a Star Wars morality perspective and feels right to me from a Christ perspective, which is that is part of you.
Yeah.
Like my battles with lust, even though I feel as though they were input into me by a friend against my wishes at 12, I feel like it was more of an activation rather than an implanting. And I'll never know.
Right.
I'll never know. I feel like alcoholics feel that way all the
Sure.
time.
Yeah.
You'll never know. But I definitely recognize that as an equal part of me as the good things about me. And in the Star Wars journey, because I think that's kind of the goal to keep tying it back, Yoda only discovers the path to becoming one with the Force. That's when you become a Force ghost, right? When you vanish into the ether in Star Wars. When he discovered that the Jedi had to understand the dark side and their passions and their angers and their fear as real and as legitimate and something that they needed to accept that lived within them rather than treating it like a boogeyman that you squash. And that's getting that balance right is really hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeff, do you have any biases or insights from the movies that you wanted to cover?
I had a hard time coming up with new ones from the previous episode. Outside of the Yoda quotes and stuff, which was on my to-do list, I don't have any other big new topics from this movie specifically.
Okay.
I have some other themes that I've Googled in my research, but we can
Well, before we get to Google themes, let's we've got a resident expert here.
Correct.
Steve,
so I didn't want to spend much time on those.
what are some themes and biases and ideas introduced specifically in A New Hope? Sorry, specifically in Empire Strikes Back that and they don't have to be true to life, but that are introduced through this movie.
I think, I don't know how to word it exactly, but it is the idea of fate versus destiny. What are the differences between the two? And whether or not we can truly be architects of the future. The central struggle that Luke is overcoming in Empire Strikes Back, and really every character is overcoming in every Star Wars movie, is a fear that they have and a desire to control the thing that makes them afraid. And for Luke, what he comes up against while he's on Dagobah is a vision that Han and Leia are going to be harmed in Cloud City by Darth Vader and that they're going to suffer.
Okay.
Which, Han does. He does get tortured and put into carbonite. He has that vision. It hasn't happened yet at the time that he's had that vision. And he tells Yoda, I saw a city in the clouds. I saw my friends. They were suffering.
Yeah.
And Yoda says, difficult to predict the future is. Always in motion it is. And he warns him, don't try to stop this thing from happening. It might just be your fear, not a vision. But Luke does what? He freaks out. He loses his cool. And he grabs his X-Wing and he gets out of there. And Luke loses his hand in the process of doing that to Darth Vader. He gets exposed to the idea that the fact that Darth Vader is his father before he is ready. And did him rushing to Cloud City ever have a chance to stop it? It did not.
Right.
By the time Luke arrives in Cloud City, Han is already in carbonite and Leia has already been whisked away, but she ends up getting rescued by Lando. So this is the central Star Wars conflict that gets repeated in every single trilogy. A bad vision in the future, and then smashing a couple eggs to make an omelet in order to fix that bad thing and stop it from happening. It's what Anakin does wrong, of course, in the prequels as well. So that's what it is. Like that's the thing, is the idea that you cannot control the future. But of course we can, right?
That brings up a question, though. Does that mean that we don't try?
Yeah.
No, we do or do not.
Well, it's true. Do not.
I think we solved that one.
But does that mean that we? I mean, that kind of goes into the predestination, topic of conversation. Where we're just like, okay, well, if God already knows who's going to heaven and who's not, why do what we're going to do?
Mm-hmm. How do you know that the feeling that you're getting is not coming from the enemy?
Right.
Right. we get this all the time. Oh, I got a really great opportunity. Yeah. An old friend reached out to me with a job opportunity, and you immediately go, God speaks, He opened a door. But have you really stopped to pray and reflect and be like, oh, actually the enemy is opening a door to a friendship from my old life that I really should not be pursuing again. You know, it's a trap.
It's a trap.
So this happens all the time. Should we try? I don't remember if Luke says to Yoda that he has to try, in order to save Luke and Leia, but he certainly does say in Return of the Jedi that he has to try in relation to saving Darth Vader and bringing him back to the light side. Everyone tells him it's hopeless. Yeah. Yoda tells him it's hopeless. Obi-Wan tells him it's hopeless. Leia tells him not to do this. And Luke says, I have to try. And he does. Yeah. He succeeds. So I hear what you're putting down. We have a bad thing that might be coming in the future that we feel is coming. So we try to do anything to stop it. But can you really? I've certainly done this with my choices parenting and what I've exposed my daughter to and not exposed her to try to protect her from what's going on in our society right now.
Yeah.
And I think all of us face this choice when we're sheltering our kids from certain things. about whether or not we're making it worse. Like, do you shelter your kids from gender ideology only for them to first learn about it from somebody else that's not you?
Yeah.
That's a tough call. And you might in this moment go, I have a vision of a thing bad that could happen. So I'm going to try to stop it by suppressing information in my household. But then it happens anyways.
Yeah.
They get indoctrinated into it anyways when they go on a trip with a friend.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's
it's inevitable.
I am inevitable.
Yeah. Gender ideology is inevitable.
It's inevitable. Which, of course it's not inevitable, but we all have that choice basically of whether or not we vaccinate people with information, or whether or not we suppress information.
Yep.
Do you let your kids know about dark things and you set the tone for the education, or do you hide them from it in an effort to protect them, this is Star Wars. I want to protect my loved ones. Therefore, I will take X and Y action to stop it, but it couldn't be stopped.
Right. Yeah. That makes me think of, are you familiar with the law of first mention?
No, not enough to regurgitate it.
Okay. So basically it's, part of early childhood development in psychology, which is basically the context in which you first hear about something is going to forever shape your opinion on it. So if your first time hearing about alcohol, for example, is how cool it is, how cool it's going to make you, it's the best thing ever, blah, 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 that's going to forever shape your opinion on it. If it's the inverse of that, it's, that it's purely from the devil, only bad people drink, that's also going to shape your opinion. If it's a more nuanced, all things in moderation,
respectful outlook.
Respectful handling, drink responsibly,
I feel this way about cigarettes. They're still cool.
Yeah.
They're still cool.
Exactly. Like, I haven't smoked in years, but still, like, when I smell a cigarette, I'm like, oh, man, that smells really good.
Not only does it smell good, it's so cool.
Yeah, exactly. And like, but I know there's nothing inherently cool about it. It's just my perception of it. And
From childhood,
it almost, there's a responsibility we have as parents to be the first one to introduce our kids to these difficult things so that we can give them robust and healthy and nuanced understandings as their first mention.
No, I think this is super important. I certainly have done that in my own household as it pertains to kind of politics and government and then faith. And the thing that I have been very afraid to touch on now, as my daughter is almost 13, is sex and gender.
Yeah.
But finally crossed that bridge here this year, and probably stopped putting it off. And I feel good about where we're at. But that does remind me, though, like just another Star Wars anecdote for the law of first mention. You remember when Palpatine is tempting Anakin Skywalker in episode 3, and he says, have you ever heard the tragedy of Darth Plagueis? And he goes, no, I thought not. It's not a story the Jedi would teach you.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what he uses to lure him in.
Yeah.
It's not a story they would tell you. I have secret knowledge.
And going to gender ideology stuff, it used to be used in a subversive way of like, oh, well, of course your parents wouldn't tell you about this. They don't want you to know about this. And now they're taking the other approach, which is we want to introduce your kids to it early. We want you to, we want to tell them that it's, that it is not just that it's a normal thing, but that it's a moral good thing, and so rather than subvert, through law of first mention, because they know that conservatives aren't talking about it, they're now aggressively, we're going to talk to your kids about it before you get the chance to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I didn't think about it that way. That's grim.
Yeah. It's not great.
It's like they planned this.
Yeah. I mean, I think that a fault of the conservative political movement is that it's always playing catch up. Right. And that makes sense. It's like they're conserving, whereas the progressive movement, it's pushing the boundaries constantly. And so the conservative movement is always finds itself, what's that line? Conservatism is progressivism driving the speed limit. The conservative platform of today looks a lot like the progressive platform of 10 to 15 years ago, because they're just trying to say, hey, not so fast, rather than, hey, we don't agree with this at all.
Yeah.
It's more playing defense than offense. Any other insights or claims that Empire Strikes Back is making? Or should we move towards wrap-up questions?
I think that's the big one. So
okay.
So no, yeah.
One thing that we like to do, and we've only missed it a couple times, is we like to look at in what ways is this movie like A Clockwork Orange?
So, Steve, as a first-time listener, Stephen, this movie was so polarizing in our experience with it.
Yeah.
And for different reasons, and we, Nelson and I have different perspectives on it now as we've gone through this podcast a little bit more, but it tended to come up so much just because it was so vivid in our experience with it that we just kept going, well, it wasn't like this movie. It wasn't just coming up. So we've kind of made it just a part of our our experience.
It almost always comes up organically, and when it doesn't, we like to shoehorn it in. So a couple big things. Empire Strikes Back actually shares cast with Clockwork Orange.
Really?
So
they're 9 years apart.
In A Clockwork Orange, remember the man that gets paralyzed? And then there's the bodybuilder that carries him around?
Yes.
That bodybuilder is the man that does the acting, not the voice work, but the acting for Darth Vader.
Really?
That's right. And then, also in A Clockwork Orange, one of the jail guards, he's also one of the security guards in
talk about typecasting.
investment. They share cast, but also they share theme. Now, Clockwork Orange deals with three big themes, which is search for identity, corrupting influence of violence, and struggle for power. And all three of these themes are super evident in so many movies, because I think that these are three big questions that everybody struggles with. Stephen, as you said early on, your conservatism and your libertarianism come into conflict because there's a part of you that says that the culture should be molded and controlled, and that violence needs to be moderated.
Yeah.
Right? And I might be taking you slightly out of context there, but
violence needs to be moderated, and many forms of law and legislation necessitate violence to enforce.
Exactly. And those are ideas fundamentally at odds with libertarianism. And both of these movies really deal with that a lot. There's a big struggle for power. Luke is trying to harness power while also reconciling the fact that the way towards more power, the way to become a great warrior is he's going to actually have to let go of a lot. He also, you talked about the cave, the dark side cave. A big part of that experience for him is about the corrupting influence of violence. He now has to reconcile the fact that if he embraces the violence that he will have to commit, he could become the very thing that he's looking to fight. And then a theme that is just pervasive in so far in every single movie we've discussed in the top 250. Search for identity is a huge theme.
Yeah.
Now, whether
that's the story of humanity. So it's
exactly. Now, we believe as Christians that we find identity in one place and one place alone, and that's Jesus Christ and his redemptive work for us. But it's very interesting to me how many of our stories that become, culturally significant are these stories about people trying to find a place in the world and trying to find identity.
The hero with 1,000 faces.
Exactly. Now with Star Wars, it's almost it's somewhat reductive because George Lucas was very intentionally borrowing from the hero's journey, right? So he was driving right for the most kind of iconic story. Yeah, so there's thematic similarities between the two movies and shared cast, surprisingly.
That's interesting.
We made it.
Yeah. So now let's get into actual wrap-up questions.
Let's wrap this up. Yeah.
Jeff, you got these for us?
I got them. Yeah. So for the listeners, this should come as no surprise, but for you, Stephen, we've got 4 questions that we like to talk with between Nelson and I and our guests. just about the movie as a whole, and just this is kind of when we get into the reviewer stage of our movie. Just that. So the first question is, would you recommend this movie? And I think this one's fairly obvious, but we'll go around the table here. Steven, would you recommend this movie?
Absolutely, every day.
Now, this came up through this question last episode, and Steven, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. Let's say that somebody is now an adult and has never seen a Star Wars. And
oh, yes.
What movie would you say you should start with?
And it does not know any spoilers.
They are an adult. They've never seen Star Wars. I recommend Rogue One.
That's exactly where we came down on it last time, too.
Such a good movie.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Star Wars or Rogue One, a Star Wars story, is the best introduction for a person who's used to the way modern cinema looks and feels, the way modern movies move, and it introduces you to the Empire Rebel struggle without the Skywalker baggage. It's a great introduction. If you like Rogue One, then pick up where it goes next.
Rogue One's a great gateway drug.
Yeah. One of the things that I absolutely love Star Wars. And I said repeatedly last episode, I just don't think A New Hope's very good. And if you start there...
It's very boring.
Yeah. But I think that Empire Strikes Back, I mentioned earlier in the episode, I think this is a phenomenal movie. I'd strongly recommend it. I don't think it's a good starting place for somebody jumping into Star Wars because you're picking up right in the middle of a trilogy and there's a lot of context lost. Yeah. So I would agree with you. If you've never seen Star Wars and for some reason this is the first time you're hearing people talk about it, start with Rogue One.
Yeah.
But of the original trilogy, this is my favorite of the three.
Okay. I don't know how to answer that. It's been a while since I've seen A New Hope. Ask me in a couple days. But yeah.
You watched A New Hope like a week ago.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in Return of the Jedi. I'm so bad with the subtitles. Oh my goodness,
Return of the Jedi is still my favorite.
Yeah, so okay. I need to watch that one again. I have some qualms with it when they changed things in modernization. I don't like. They should leave it alone with the way it was when it was made in history. But I feel like I love was it the Jawas or the Ewoks? The Ewoks.
The Ewoks.
I love the cute little things. I remember moments of it, like I've got to watch it again too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would absolutely recommend this movie. I go back and forth, but I still think, even though I've grown up with the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I've been involved with Marvel since day one.
2008.
Star Wars for me is still, I feel just the depth. I'm attached to Star Wars more. Yeah. So for me, like, even though there's cringy moments, I love Star Wars and I would recommend everything. Spoiler for next episode's question. But yeah. All right. So the next question here, this movie is rated PG. Would you guys change the rating? Was there anything in it that would make this not a PG movie, whether worse or less worse?
No, I wouldn't change it. It is appropriate for not just its time, but for today as well for a PG rating. If Temple of Doom is the beginning of PG-13, which is correctly labeled now, well, actually, no, it's still PG, right? But it was what necessitated the creation of PG-13 was Temple of Doom.
That's correct.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's a whole story.
So that movie was the bring. Okay.
Yeah.
Temple of Doom sparked the ire across like Moms of America that is what created PG-13 was Temple of Doom.
Fantastic.
And it still carries the PG rating, but everything that came after was graded against the heart getting ripped out of that guy's chest.
Way to go, Harrison.
Anyways, Empire is correctly rated.
I agree. The only graphics there is that abominable snowman's arm, which is not even bloody.
No.
And then the depiction of a decapitation, but like it's not.
Well,
it's
you
not
also
shown,
have
it's not shown in a graphic way.
I would say you make it PG-13 just because you got brothers kissing sisters.
That's true. That is true. There's some West Virginia relationships in there. No offense to our West Virginia relationships.
No. Leia kisses Luke despite Han Solo at the beginning.
No, they smooch after he gets out of the healing tank.
Yes, Han Solo's trying to get Leia to admit that she loves him, and so she kisses Luke just to spite him.
There was a kiss in the cheek. There was a kiss on the cheek in A New Hope.
Yeah.
but there was some lip
rated R.
action in this movie.
Yeah, make it rated R. That's right.
But yeah, no, I agree. The rating is
I'd say it's appropriate. Do you think that had it been a PG-13 movie and the liberties that come with that, it would make it a better movie, or it would suffer for it?
PG-13 never makes something better.
Okay.
No, it never makes anything better. George Lucas was incredibly conflicted about Revenge of the Sith being the first PG-13 Star Wars movie. It was something they did a lot of soul searching on, and the backstory of that is that the slaughter of the Jedi Temple and the death of the younglings and the Jedi children was supposed to be way more graphic than it was.
Yeah.
But
so was Revenge of the Sith?
Episode
is it
3.
PG?
It's PG-13.
It's PG-13.
Okay, but it was meant to be more graphic than PG-13.
George
meant to
was
be more
pushing
graphic
it
than
further.
it was.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I track with you. Okay. All right. Well, two more questions here. Has this movie aged well? Outside of well, I'll give my opinion in a second. Has this movie aged well?
I think so. I think it's aged really well.
100%. Yeah, it looks really good when you watch it. You don't question the special effects.
Yeah.
It looks right. It's crazy.
Even the digital remastering hasn't been as bad as it was with A New Hope, for example. A New Hope introduced really bad CGI, which they avoided
it was
with this.
still in this movie though. Like the
But not as
CGI
much.
still didn't look great, and I wish they just would have left it alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or they need to update it again.
Right.
Like if they're going to update it, might as well just continue to update it and continue to modernize it. But like I just go back to the original.
I loved Frank Oz as Yoda,
absolutely,
Fozzie Bear.
The practical puppets. I mean, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, and if I can just get on a soapbox here real quick, just because one of my favorite fandoms they're redoing. I don't, there's some, and I'm going to sound like my dad here, like there's some movies that I hope never get redone in the original trilogy, which because they're creating new content for Star Wars right now, I don't think I'll see that in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Knock on wood. But like the fact that they're redoing the Harry Potter series.
I didn't know that.
Insane.
So fresh. Yeah. So they're making it a 7-season TV show on HBO Max. They're going to do it more accurate to the books, which I understand the pros of, but like, there's not been enough time.
Are they going
and those
to
movies
also...
are still iconic.
So one thing that's really interesting with those books, I don't care for the books, but one success of the books is how each book is age appropriate.
Right. It grows with the audience.
Series?
I imagine so. Which
Cool.
it's like I understand the concept and I will watch it. I'm not saying I'm against it enough to where I'm not going to watch it, but there hasn't been enough time that's passed. And so my fear is that down the road, if it ever does happen, that it's long time down the road.
Yeah.
But I would hate for them to ever remake this movie. Even if it does at some point get a little too cringy because so much time has passed, it doesn't look as good.
Yeah.
I hope they never touch it.
Mm-hmm.
But now that they're starting to do that with some of these more modern movies.
Yeah.
I'm getting nervous for some of these classics.
Interesting.
So that's my opinion. Yes, I think it's aged well, and I don't think they should touch it.
Okay.
Stop touching this movie. All right. Last question here. Would this movie be in your personal top 250?
Absolutely. It's squarely up there in my top 250 with Titanic and Patriot Games and Halloween.
Would any of the
Halloween.
Star Wars movies not make it into your top 250?
Yeah, is there any Halloween content that you're not in love with?
So much
shows or
Halloween.
movies. Shows or movies.
So much Halloween content I'm not in love with. Did you mean Star Wars
I
content?
meant Star Wars. Yep, I meant Star Wars. Yeah.
Are there any Star Wars movies that
yeah.
would make it to your top 250?
The bottom of the barrel, which would not make it into my top 250, is The Rise of Skywalker, episode 9.
Yep.
The most recent and final.
And most hated.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's the most hated. The Last Jedi is the most divisive.
Correct.
The Last Jedi is the one that lights people's hairs on fire, but the Rise of Skywalker is so much worse.
Yeah.
Now,
unwatchable.
No, I'm intrigued. If we're good on time, if I can pick your brain a little bit just on this, because obviously I'm doing a movie podcast, so I have to be critical in some aspects, but I am still a lover of entertainment, and I haven't gotten to the point, and I hope I never do, to where I'm I'm nitpicking on things. So like I kind of had to talk.
Good for you.
Like, well, yeah, and I that is my prayer that I never evolve into something different. But like I had to talk myself into this idea of like, if I start to nitpick this movie, which there are things I disagree with the movie 9, and technically every movie, there's some things I would have done differently, but I'm not in the movie making business. But in general, like I got to the point where like, if I start to break this apart, I'm going to ruin the whole world of Star Wars for me. So I had to convince myself, and not just convince myself, but like I truly do believe that all 9 movies I can watch, I can sit with, and I can enjoy for different reasons individually. I do frustratingly struggle with some of the storyline aspects, but I still enjoy it as a movie, as something that is meant to entertain. I still like The Rise of Skywalker. I like it. I'm going to put me on the books. I like that
I'm happy
movie.
for you. I
have to.
So,
I have to like it.
What you just said there, and everything that you just laid out about the disposition that you want to protect and maintain as an enjoyer of movies, I'm right there with you. I really feel bad for and worry about people, particularly online individuals, who spend their entire lives picking apart movies that they pretend to love, and being unhappy. Star Wars fills me with so much joy, and watching every single one of them with my family in succession, treating them like sacred texts of sorts, and enjoying them even when they're bad. I mean, this is kind of what my life has always been about. And The Rise of Skywalker for me, I wrote about it in the end of my book, How the Force Can Fix the World. I wrote in the epilogue about how The Rise of Skywalker almost like broke my Star Wars faith. Like I remember leaving the theater so demoralized, and I had just lost a really important friendship in my life. And I was really doubting who I was at that moment. And then that movie was over the line for me. And I was like, who am I if I feel this way? Who am I if I don't apologize for this movie? And rationalize why it's good. And so I wrote about in the book about how I kind of had to come to peace with that, and still finding joy in things that are flawed and imperfect, and not giving into the impulse of particularly Star Wars fans to act insane when things don't meet their expectations. I'm sort of a canon believer, where once something is canon, I internalize it as something I need to learn to understand. And I'm like, all right, well, the decision makers have decided that Rey is a Palpatine. I don't really want to talk about what I would have done, because it wouldn't have been that, but I will try to become expert in why she is a Palpatine. And I will also try to become expert in why her taking the Skywalker name at the end of the movie was actually really beautiful. And I've written a little bit about why that choice was actually very beautiful for an otherwise bad movie. But yeah, no, I just wanted to say I appreciate the way that you put that.
Which was worse, Rise of Skywalker or the Jack Black episode of Mandalorian season 3?
The Rise of Skywalker, the Jack Black episode of Mandalorian season 3 or 4. Are we in 4 now?
Season 3 just finished.
It was maybe my second favorite of the season.
Really?
I loved it.
I hated that episode. And it wasn't because it was Jack Black. Like, I love Jack Black. Just like
no, there was a lot going on.
Okay, all right. That wraps.
That was the top 250. I think we all.
That's all of our questions here. Stephen, if our listeners want to follow you and want to hear more from you, apart from your book, which is linked below in the show notes, where else can they find you?
Yeah, so I've got a couple different projects that I'd love people to follow me on and learn about what I'm doing. On Substack, I am writing and editing at thisistheway.substack.com. This is the Way is the name of the publication. I break down philosophy, religion, faith, spirituality through the lens of pop culture. So all of the articles and content are about, how Ted Lasso,
Yes.
actually connects really nicely to a Quaker virtue on finding God's purpose for you in life. And, I did an article this week on The Mandalorian and how it speaks about loneliness versus finding your purpose. So that's what we do at This Is the Way. And if you like what's going on there, then you'll find my new YouTube venture, which I'm starting up soon. And you can follow me also on Twitter at Stephen_Kent89.
Both of those are linked in the show notes below. If you're a fan of this podcast, and if you're listening to this, you probably are, you're going to enjoy what Steven's doing over at This Is the Way. Next episode, 2 weeks from now, is Return of the Jedi.
The conclusion of the trilogy.
The conclusion of the trilogy with the Things We Say podcast. They will be our guests, Nate Ward and Sheldon Stauffer. Links to their podcast below so you can get a little bit more familiar with them. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us this week. It was a pleasure. You brought some insight that I think we really would have missed had it just been Jeff and I talking at each other. So it was really a real pleasure to have you. You brought us an air of sophistication to this episode.
Thank you so much. This was a real pleasure.
Awesome. No, we were glad to have you, and you're welcome back anytime.
That's right.
Yeah.
The Titanic's not in the top 250.
We'll find a way to bring you back.
We're going to find something else for you.
I casually dropped a movie that no one ever talks about called Patriot Games. And if you ever want to do Patriot Games, I'm your guy.
All right.
Fantastic.
Tom Clancy.
That's it. Is that Harrison Ford too?
It's Harrison Ford versus Sean Bean.
That's it. Yeah,
I know. Sean Bean is Irish Republican Army. Irish Republican Army versus Tom Harrison Ford.
I know that movie. I just don't know if I've seen it.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Oh,
excellent.
So good.
Excellent.
I get that one and Air Force One mixed up because that's also Harrison Ford.
They're the same movie.
Okay. Because I know I've seen Air Force One. Yeah.
Same movie. I'm pretty sure the guy who plays the traitor in this movie is the same actor.
That's fantastic.
It's hilarious. All right, guys, have a good night.
Thank
you so much, Stephen. Thanks for listening. We had a great time putting this together for you.
To join the conversation, find us on Facebook and Instagram at Silver Screen Biases.
And on Twitter at Screen Biases.
We believe in value for value, so if you found value in our show, we ask you to consider supporting us.
Links to our social media and support can be found in the show notes.